Hi everybody, this is the last lecture of the Facing Human Wrongs course, Navigating the Complexities of Social and Global Change. And I'm Vanessa Andreotti, and I would like to start this session by acknowledging the land as a living entity, not property and not resource, and the fact that I'm working and speaking to you from the unceded lands of the Kwantlen, the Katsi, and the Stolo peoples. So, as I said before, this is Unlearning Bundle 6 Towards New Mistakes, and today the lecture is going to be about gesturing and moving beyond the four denials, the denials of violence, unsustainability, entanglement, and the magnitude of the challenges we're facing. And these were the four denials that structured the previous learning bundles, right? So in this course, we talked a lot about navigating the complexities and paradoxes of social and global change, and we said we would focus on two different capabilities and just sets of capabilities and dispositions. The first one was your capacity to hold space for difficult and painful things without feeling immobilized, overwhelmed, or wanting to be rescued from discomfort. This is what we call negative capability, the capability to face, hold, and compost shit. So the other set of capabilities were capabilities related to navigating VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambivalence, and also of layering reality in the self as well. So thinking about how different dynamic layers operate with each other, especially in interfaces, in contexts of interfaces between community senses and sensibilities in historical dissonance that also carry historical trauma. So the idea of generative capabilities is to figure out a way of moving together differently, in a different way in this context. So today we're trying to bring it all together. We're going to be talking about a few concepts in the beginning, I would call them learning entities that can help as you finish the course, wrap up the course, and then move into working in different ways and showing up in different ways in your contexts. And then we're going to talk about the case study of the last warning campaign that I've been involved with for the last 4 weeks, about the crisis in Brazil as an example of how everything that we've learned in the course can be brought together as we try to respond to an emergency, right? So I've selected a few things from the campaign that we are learning in the backstage, in the background of the campaign, to share with you that illustrate how a few of these dispositioning capabilities can be extremely useful in a real situation where we need to work together in a different way, in a context that is very complex, that is very volatile, that also requires us to not be fixed in one way, to be adapting all the time, and to be working with this complexity without resentment, I guess, that the complexity is there, right? So I will start with a compass that we have used in GTDF, which is the Research and Arts Collective that I work from, which is called the SMDR compass. But before I talk about that, I need to say that the words here are being used in particular ways, and I'm only using the word sobriety, for example, which is the first S. In this context, I wouldn't use it in another context. So, for example, when we're talking to indigenous communities, the word sobriety has been weaponized in that context, so I wouldn't use that word. I would have to choose a word that is more relevant and more appropriate to the context there. But here, it makes sense to use sobriety. No word is universal, right? So SMDR stands for sobriety, maturity, discernment, and responsibility. And this set of words has been chosen for people in low-intensity struggles, not for people in high-intensity struggles, right? So low-intensity struggle people are people who have a choice to engage or not engage in struggle, and where our lives are not at risk, our lives are not at risk. So people in high intensity struggle, and there are different degrees of high intensity, they don't have a choice. They have to fight, and they have to fight for their lives. If they don't fight, there is a huge consequence, right? For them or for their community. So sobriety in this context means that we need to start to act in ways that interrupt our compulsions, the compulsions that have been conditioned by modernity and by the society that we live in. So I'm talking here about the compulsion to consume not only stuff, but also relationships, experiences, and knowledge. So how do we stop that compulsion and that obsession? Also, compulsions also come from unprocessed emotions and traumas. It's a saturation of emotions, and they manifest as us competing for different things. It can be competing for platform, for attention, using the space for validation. And these are things that really become a problem if you're trying to address a complex challenge. If you have to spend a lot of time with the compulsions of other people, the actual issue that you have to work with doesn't get the attention or the space it deserves. It becomes something that then the movement becomes something that just is trying to appease these compulsions. The other thing about compulsion is that our compulsions are generally insatiable, right? So we think that when we will get what we want from that compulsion, we're going to be feeling better and satisfied, and that doesn't happen. So compulsions are very similar to addictions, and they are similarly very difficult to interrupt. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on our compulsions that comes from our collective and individual traumas, that if we don't work on them, we become work for other people, right? And we really then start to become an obstacle in the process of really centering ourselves and centering the land in the what's happening, right? The emergency that we have to work with. So sobriety is that, and it's our responsibility then to bring ourselves and the whole bus to sobriety to be able to address something from the best possible space. And it's a process of decentering as well. So the next one is maturity. And maturity here is used again with a specific meaning. It's not about being able to look after yourself, but it's about being able to do what is needed rather than what you want to do. And that's a tough one because our society also conditions us to desire a lot of autonomy, a lot of authority, a lot of affirmation, and a lot of arbitration. And sometimes maturity is about figuring out who's the best person to make the decision at that point, even though it may go against a few of the other self-interests that are mixed up in a specific context, right? And sometimes it means, most of the time, it means putting your own self-interest aside and putting yourself at service of what needs to be done. Discernment is very much about distinguishing the different layers, how the layers conflict, what are the paradoxes, the contradictions, and trying to move it to what is the most accountable thing to do in relationship to all the different layers. Sometimes it means working with 2 layers, sometimes it means working with 3 or 4, sometimes something that you do in one layer has a negative effect in another. And discernment is about an overview of that and establishing the priorities that are really urgent for a specific context and specific moment. And then responsibility is about, it's something that comes from the gut. It's not necessarily, this responsibility here that is being used is visceral. It's not an intellectual choice, a matter of convenience or the allocation of will. Responsibility, it's not about even taking responsibility. It's about facing responsibility, which is different. It comes from a different side. You're not doing it because you're a good person and you want to signal your virtue. You're doing it because that's the only right thing to do. And even though it can make you look ridiculous, or it can make you look, you would do it despite it asking something that you wouldn't have wanted or liked to do, but you know that that's the right thing to do, because also there's a voice probably from somebody from 7 generations from now in your head saying, okay, you know what to do, and you have the knowledge now. How are you accountable to that future? How are you accountable to something beyond yourself? And it doesn't have to be your offspring for that to work. It actually is about life in the future, whether or not my genes are involved, right? So that's the idea of being a good elder for all relations. It's realizing we're part of something much bigger and being accountable to the continuity of life at that level. So that's responsibility, and it requires a constant question, which is a very simple one, which is, what is the most, what is the next small, most responsible thing to do? What's the next small, most responsible thing to do? And that's the question that we suggest should be asked all the time. So SMDR also informs a metaphor that we have, which is learning to walk a tightrope. So as we go into the storms that we're going into, of the global challenges that are super complex in a context of VUCA, right? It's going to be like learning to walk a tightrope. And this tightrope is located, let me just share this with you. This tightrope is located between 2 types of abyss, so 2 abysses. The first abyss is the abyss of desperate hope, where we're looking to hold on to something like a right ideology, the heroic authority, the chosen people, a special practice, or a return to a place and time, this nostalgia, right? And we hold on to that, and it becomes a bubble, kind of a fantasy bubble that gives us hope, and that gives us something to make us feel better. But then it also protects us from sitting with the reality of the situation, right? We then, it's a form of, in some sense, it's a form of self-infantilization, right? So we hold on to something. We know it's not perfect, but that's what gives, we hold on to it out of a compulsion to feel good, out of a fear of feeling desperate. But this is a desperate act as well, right? So that kind of desperate hope, the problem with it is that it sucks a lot of resources, a lot of time, and it creates these idealizations and romanticizations and projections that could be great learning experiences too, but that also prevent us from sitting with the more difficult and painful aspects of reality and addressing the problems in a much more complex and layered way that can actually do something with the roots rather than addressing just the symptoms. And then the other abyss is the abyss of reckless hopelessness. And there you have like whateverism, everything goes, hedonism, which is about just living for pleasure, misanthropy, which is the hate of humanity and saying, okay, the earth is just shaking us off, good riddance kind of thing. Then there's nihilism and different forms of nihilism there, which is the now what for, like I don't care anymore. And then the banalization of brutality, which becomes a kind of a deviation from nihilism where you feel pleasure in the suffering of others, right? So that's the reckless hope, a result of reckless hopelessness. So in trying to avoid both desperate hope and reckless hopelessness, what we propose is that, guided by the SMDR or the SMDA compass, which is sobriety, maturity, discernment, and accountability or responsibility, we learn to walk a tightrope with 4 ages. In the picture, you'll only see 3, but there's a 4th one. So the 4th one is the most important one, which is honesty, right? Sitting with everything, not turning our back to what is hard. And honesty in wanting not to be protected from reality. Honesty in sitting with your whole bus and with the whole thing outside of you and not trying to turn your back to that. Then there's humility, which is about trying not to make it about our egos, ourselves, and putting ourselves at service of something that is bigger than ourselves. Then humor, which is important because if we're going to sit with what's difficult, what's hard, what's painful, with a lot of shit that needs to be composted, this is heavy content, and we need a light container. And the light container is humor. This humor is a specific kind of humor that is a lesson that is also coming from the communities in high intensity struggle, that they say that what keeps them from becoming desperate is the constant use of humor in their struggle. And hyper self-reflexivity is the responsibility of everyone, but particularly of those in low intensity struggle like ourselves, who have access to all those things and who have a choice to trace the ways in which we're complicit in harm and the debts that we have, the ways we are indebted to other beings and other struggles, and not so much to just list them and name them, but to do something about it. It's a debt that compels reparations, and that compels a different way of existing that doesn't reproduce the same mistakes that have been made in the past, right? So hyper self-reflexivity is not something about guilt or shame. It is about being able to sit with culpability in a very different way. It is in many ways about regret and mourning of the wrongs that have been done, and then facing the responsibility we have in relation to reparations and interrupting that harm in the present and in the future. But before we can do that, we need to understand this very deeply and feel the pain that we have caused as well. And that's hard. People don't want to do that. So how do we support people to turn to that mode of being? That where if we don't sit with the shit, if we say in our collective, no shit, no starter. If we can't sit with the shit, there's no point imagining a way forward where we just skip that part and go straight to a harmonious future of justice and fairness and love and peace for all, when that shit is all there still to be composted, right? So that's one thing. And then the last learning entity that I would like to talk to you about, just tell you, it's beyond the seesaw and the 5 E's, and I'm going to explain that to you in a bit. So remember the seesaw, we looked at that in unit 1. It's the seesaw of +1, -1. So because of the separability that is the foundation of the house of modernity, what that does to us is that it removes the intrinsic value of life. So in that sense, for you to be worthy of being alive, you have to be participating in the economies of modernity, producing value, producing, showing others that you have worth, and then you are expecting that external validation, right? So you are either amazing, everything is awesome. So you do that to yourself, and you do that to others, right? So either I'm great or I'm crap. Either everything is awesome or everything sucks, and you go, or I suck, right? And you become attached to the seesaw, and then you have highs when you get dopamine and oxytocin and endorphins, and lows when you feel that you don't get the validation, or you're nothing and you have no impact, or you're a waste of space and all of that, right? So from the communities we're working with, they say this is the main problem, basically, that there's this +1, -1 thing. We need to get to 0. We need to recognize ourselves as ordinary people, that we have the good, the bad, the broken, and the messed up of all of humanity within and around us. And that actually is us reclaiming the intrinsic value of our lives. We are all insufficient and indispensable, and we do what we can do without it becoming an indulgence, right? Like, oh, then everybody does what they can do, and it's just, no, we do that with responsibility, with a deep form of responsibility that comes from the guts, right? So the seesaw thing, the +1, -1, creates a type of politics within modernity that is based on the 5 E's. So the 5 E's are exceptionalism, exaltedness, ego empowerment, expansion of entitlements, and externalization of culpability. Exceptionalism is this idea that there's a group, a person, or a genius, or a leader that is exceptional, or a people that is exceptional, and that will take us out of the mass. Exaltedness is the desire for this greatness, amazingness, and lots of validation and pats on the back for us to be seen in this heroic position, out of a fear of the worthlessness that is already there. So the need for this kind of validation is based on a fear. It's compensating for a fear, and we need to get to address this fear and compost this fear to be able to not need that and not take space with that, right? Then ego empowerment, especially now in the social media context. The politics is about what you perform to be, right? And that is related to the narratives we have about our ego. And there's very little in society that rewards ego discentrament. There's a lot that rewards ego empowerment. Then there's expansion of entitlements, generally colonial entitlements. We just want more access, more autonomy, more authority, more and more. And when everybody is fighting for their own entitlements, what happens is that nobody is really fighting for responsibility, and it becomes entitlements against entitlements. So with the entitlements that the left perceives versus the entitlements that the right perceives versus the entitlements of minorities versus the entitlements of the center, like it becomes in a very, very chaotic and cacophonic, and can become very volatile and violent as well. And then there's the externalization of culpability. Everybody wants to be innocent. The problem is the corporations, it's the other groups, it's something else in the world, and I'm the one who needs to be liberated from that, rather than seeing that the problem is inside as well. I'm part of the world. I'm not separated from the world. It's one team. The vulnerabilities and violences are unevenly distributed, but it's one team. It's one metabolism. The planet is one organism, right? And we need to figure out how we are complicit before we can, and that doesn't paralyze us or immobilizes us. That actually is where responsibility comes from, right? That sitting with this culpability in a different way, which is very hard because there's no incentive for that again, right? So this is the politics that is possible within modernity. If you try to deviate from that, you become unintelligible. And this is the politics of both the left, the far left, the right, the far right, and the center. So to create a politics that is not based on exceptionalism, exaltedness, ego empowerment, expansion of entitlements, and externalization of culpability is one of the greatest challenges, but it's one that I think we need to accept. And we need, in that sense, a political practice of healing and well-being that takes us somewhere else. And this is coming again from the Teia das Cinco Curas indigenous communities, where when we started talking to them about the 5 concepts of justice, right? They said it's not justice that the concept we want to work with. We don't want to work with concepts. We want to work with practices. And we think the problem is that our metabolism, the planet, and our bodies, they are sick. We need healing and another way of feeling well, another form of well-being than the one promised by modernity. So then the whole thing shifted to 5 modes of healing: healing your thinking, healing your feelings, healing your relationships, healing your exchanges, and healing your sense of entanglement with the earth, and how you face the cycles of life and death. So how you face pain, how you face grief, and how you face, how you feel the suffering of other people. So now it's the time for the case study, the last warning campaign. And I'm not going to talk about the content of the campaign because you're going to see it several times today. I'm going to be showing you several videos that were produced in the campaign and how people reacted to them, and some of the things we've learned from these reactions, and how we adapted, and how we were trying to use SMDR and the tightrope and the politics beyond 5 E's to navigate the complexities that we found in our context. So the history of this is that we have a long relationship with the Tia das Cinco Curas. I was there when it started, and the communities decided that that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to create a network. The University of British Columbia, the University of British Columbia, I had the possibility of a project, a research project, and we were trying to organize around that, but then it became something that the communities themselves led, and I took several steps back, and just did what I could to support, and that was that's been happening for the last 5 years, and until we had last year, at the end of last year, the first time that this big landmark case was being voted. They asked us to organize a solidarity campaign. We did that, and then the voting was delayed, and it was delayed to June, and it was delayed again last June to a date on the 25th of August. But then what happened at that point was that the communities and the movement, the indigenous movement in Brazil, started to realize that it was not just that landmark case that was going to take away their lands. It was a more coordinated, smart attack on the Amazon, on Pantanal, which is another place in Brazil that is smaller than the Amazon, but it's marshlands, mostly. I think marshlands is the right word, but it's another area that is protected, that is under threat, and that this coordinated attack on the Amazon would require the government to also cancel indigenous people's rights, because they were the last line of defense of these places, legally and existentially, right? So there was a realization that there was a real threat of genocide, because if the rights are canceled, this will embolden another movement, a far-right movement in Brazil, of people wanting to take indigenous lands, like land grabbers, who are people who are poor, but that have been told that indigenous people don't deserve these lands, so they are generally ultra-conservative evangelical people who believe that in the concept of terra nullius and in the concept of manifest destiny. So whatever it was that started colonialism, that we tend to think for the first settlers who came, that's the ideology that they hold. So killing indigenous people is who don't convert to their religion is actually authorized as a form of bringing prosperity and progress to the land, because indigenous people from that perspective, they don't deserve the land. So there are several layers of problematic issues in relation to this campaign. There's also the layer that internationally the Amazon has been an icon for people, and many agencies and nations have claimed that the Amazon should actually be an international space. And every single government in Brazil has pushed back against that and said, no, you back away. Like, this is our territory. It's a question of sovereignty. And there's a very patriotic sentiment that goes with that for all Brazilians. So creating an international, when we were asked to create an international campaign of awareness raising about what was unfolding in Brazil in terms of both ecocide and genocide, we had to be careful with a number of different things, because if we just created a campaign around the Amazon, this could actually reinforce the patriotic sentiment in Brazil and throw indigenous people under the bus, right? So we had to be very careful about how to put the two together. And this campaign then, instead of coming from the calls coming from the international community, the campaign needed to be, the call for international cooperation needed to come from indigenous people in the Amazon, because also there is there are lots of differences between remote communities and semi-urban communities in Brazil, indigenous communities, and the risks are very different that they are facing right now. So we One of the communities in the TEA is the Hunikui. It's not just one community, it's a federation of 117 communities representing over 16,000 people. They were the ones who asked us if we could launch a campaign through their federation. So the campaign was launched then by the Federation of the Hunikui people, and Chief Ninawa Hunikui, who is both an elected president of the federation and a hereditary chief, was the center figure of this campaign. So the campaign in the beginning looked like, looked like this. I will go back to the 2 slides before. We tested this concept with a group of people. But before I go there, I'll just go back a little bit to the main issue of the campaign. So what we were asked to do as an arts research collective located in Canada, who had been working with these communities for a long time, was to mobilize people to care about the destruction of the Amazon forest and the indigenous peoples who are the forest land's line of defense, and all other indigenous people as well. So we're doing this in a context of chaotic cacophony, of multiple crises that make people somewhat indifferent to the suffering of others because they're suffering everywhere, of competing interests. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. The risk of weaponization of the campaign, like what I said, if we did it only about the Amazon, it could really turn into and be weaponized by Bolsonaro against indigenous people, and problematic desires on both sides, actually, of how what we want out of this, right? So the problematic desires we're going to be talking about today is the desires of the international audience, because this is the most interesting, I think, for the course. But there were problematic desires everywhere. We're all implicated in these problematic desires, right? And it's difficult to interrupt them. So back to Chief Ninawa's campaign. So this was the first version of the campaign, and it was centered on Chief Ninawa because he is the most legitimate caller of this cooperation, international cooperation, the most legitimate voice to be issuing that call and that invitation. And when we tried to test it here in North America with Gen Z, with young people, students, one of the things that came up in relationship to what they wanted to see when they first met this, it reflects the kind of culture of critique that we have in North America right now, critique and activism. So what the feedback was that the campaign would be seen as patriarchal, and because it's a man, so there was this desire for it to be a queer person or a woman, or the other thing was that why are we focused on indigenous? Can we have an indigenous person who's also black so that we can say that we're supporting both? And then again, I had to sit with it a little bit and then think, is the person vegetarian? Why are there feathers there? Do they kill animals? If I'm an animal activist, animal rights activist, can I support this? So all these concerns showed us that there is an aesthetic normativity in activism in the North that was being imposed on a Southern context without full understanding of the real the realities of the situation, right? So when I try to explain, for example, that Chief Ninawa receives death threats constantly, and by putting himself in this position by his community, this was perceived to be service rather than self-promotion, and the increased visibility was putting his life further at risk. This was something that was not natural for young activists here, for student activists here, to connect with, which is different from those who have, talking about like Gen W or Gen X, which is people over 40 or over 50. They have lived through other types of struggle that where these things were not the priority, and they could more directly understand why that person was the best person to make that call. So it was interesting that there is a problematic North American activist aesthetics and sensibility that may prevent solidarity with with contexts of the South that have a very different aesthetics and complexity, right? And that are high intensity struggles. So that was one of the first things that we had to sit with and learn how to respond. So our response was actually to take the issue to the communities, to the Teia das Cinco Curas, and see what they would come up with as a response. And what they came up with was that the fact that they wanted them to be in the campaign. They said, okay, let's put all our names there. And they knew that the risk was going to increase, but then it was going to be distributed between all of them. But then it created also a problem about how multiple people wanted to be represented in the campaign. So we had some people wanting to be represented as super happy people, like showing the strength of the culture, and we tried that. And they wanted we had to have conversations about what kinds of moods and tones and that would mobilize support, right? Because not necessarily how they want to be represented could mobilize support in the international community. For some people, some people would say, let them represent them exactly as they want to represent them, and I'll support them. But that's not what most people would say, and the problem then is that there's no understanding on both sides of those aesthetic clashes, right? So we tested this one with climate activists in Europe to see how they would respond to this image of the campaign. And one of the responses was that they saw the urgency of it, but they didn't feel compelled to support because they didn't see themselves in the campaign. So in the European context, especially the Nordic context, they are used to seeing Greta. It's a white person calling for strikes, calling for responsibility. And when they saw indigenous peoples, they said, like, I can't see myself mirrored. I need a place. I need to be a protagonist in this. Remember the 5 E's? I need to be the exception. I need to be seen as exceptional in this. And if I can't, then I can't bring myself to supporting something where I'm not at the center. Which was a hard thing to hear. It took me a day to get over myself, to say, oh my God, where are we at? And how are we going to survive this? If that's the attitude, right? But then I had people saying, okay, this is where we're at, this is where we're at. That's Vanessa, sit with the reality. Where's the honesty in your tightrope walk? And I stopped idealizing whatever it was that I was idealizing or resenting what I was resenting, and had to say, okay, this is the context, this is what I have to work with, and I need to walk that, right? So we had produced this video that you have already seen of all the indigenous communities together collaborating to create a video. I'm not going to show it again because you have already seen this one. It was the one that Sharon presented to a group and I presented to another. But needless to say that the video did not provoke the effect in all audiences. It was great for the communities, loved doing it. They did it over the weekend and through WhatsApp, and it was great for boosting morale, but it's not a video that works with every audience. So audiences that are very sensitized to the indigenous, non-indigenous interface and know all the complexities, know the problems, they love this video. But these are very few people. They are not the majority. So from the Nordic context, we learned that we needed more non-indigenous people to be saying things or inviting people to this campaign so that non-indigenous people could be mirrored in the campaign. And that's why we created a video. We were thinking first about creating a video with celebrities but we were told that this is overdone, and that in the climate movement it was better to have experts, researchers, right? Also because, and there's a problem with that too, but I'll talk about that later, but that it would create the right kind of vibe to mobilize support, especially for the climate activists. So I'll show you this one. And as you watch this film, it's very short, 6 minutes. As you watch the video, try to think about, try to check your bus and think about what kinds of things how could this video mobilize things in generative ways, but also what kinds of problems might the video create. So I'll start.
Brazil is voting to take away indigenous lands, to cancel indigenous rights, and to remove the protections of the Amazon forest and of other sensitive areas. A Supreme Court landmark case being ruled in August is the most imminent threat to indigenous peoples in Brazil today.
But this is also much bigger than that. There are several bills going through Congress that are part of a larger plan. The plan of the current Brazilian government is to open up the Amazon and other protective areas in Brazil to predatory industries.
The Amazon forest is very close to its tipping point. More deforestation could send its complex system into an unstoppable spiral, where it could turn from a forest to a savanna.
In this case, the Amazon could turn from a massive carbon sink into a massive carbon source. We cannot stress enough the importance of the Amazon forest for life on this planet. The Amazon forest has existed for more than 50 million years. It is over 5 million square kilometers and spans 9 countries. Around 60% of the Amazon is located in Brazil.
It has a crucial role in regulating continental water cycles and global water cycles, energy cycles, and climate around the world. It regulates precipitation far downstream. It helps regulate the oceans and their energetics and their currents, and indeed the Earth's atmosphere.
The forest holds 10% of the world known biodiversity. To date, Western science has only studied 1% of this biodiversity. Indigenous peoples consider the forest their university, and they know it better than anyone else.
The Amazon is also considered the pharmacy of the future. The cures to many current and future diseases exist in its living biome. The knowledge about many of the medicinal plants is also held by indigenous peoples. And all of this is under threat.
There has been exponential deforestation due to global demand for beef, soy, and corn, as well as oil, gas, copper, iron, and gold. This means that there has already been irreversible biodiversity loss.
In the last 2 years, the deforestation in Brazil reached the highest levels since 2008. Criminal forest fires that are used to clear the land for illegal activities has also risen exponentially.
Indigenous peoples are the last line of defense of the Amazon and of many sensitive areas around the world, including in North America. Indigenous peoples in Brazil have been fighting state-sanctioned illegal invasions in their territories. In the Amazon, they also fight against illegal mining and logging and exploitative and unsustainable agribusiness. There are around 50 isolated indigenous groups in the Amazon whose ways of life are protected under the current constitution, but one of the bills to be voted on in the Brazilian Congress could change that. Indigenous peoples are putting their lives on the line to defend protected areas of Brazil. However, major environmental crimes mostly go unpunished. Many environmentalists and indigenous leaders have been assassinated.
Indigenous peoples in the Amazon have also experienced firsthand the effects of climate change, like atypical floods and droughts and food and water shortages.
If we have any chance of mitigating the effects of climate change, we need to protect and defend the rights of Indigenous peoples everywhere. Indigenous peoples' rights should be central to the climate agenda and central to climate action.
If Indigenous peoples' rights are cancelled and Indigenous lands taken away, the loss of human and non-human life will be immense, and the future of all of us will be at risk.
what is happening in Brazil can set a dangerous precedent for governments around the world, especially in highly polarized societies.
We need to recognize that social and ecological collapse are already happening for many people around the world, that the prosperity of some is at the expense of many and of the planet itself. We need to stop the violence.
We need to stop the violence. We need to take a stand for the Amazon and the rights of indigenous peoples in Brazil and around the world. What is happening in Brazil affects all of us. This is urgent.
This is urgent. This is an emergency. We all need to act now.
We stand with indigenous peoples everywhere.
Sou Ninauá Inu Runicuim, sou liderança do povo Runicuim e também sou liderança na campanha Último Aviso. Em nome do meu povo, quero agradecer muito a liderança e a generosidade intelectual de vocês no suporte dessa luta pela defesa da Amazônia, pela defesa dos direitos dos povos indígenas do Brasil e do mundo. Muito obrigado mesmo por adicionar as suas vozes enquanto pesquisadores a essa luta. Como povo Runicuim, agora vocês também são guardiões da floresta amazônica.
So this video was extremely useful. I'm extremely grateful also to everybody who participated. We sent out 80 requests to CRCs, me and Cash. And then in the end we received 13 replies back, which was great, and some other support in other ways as well. And it works for many audiences that see themselves in there and that also appreciate the science that is there and the legitimacy. And it also creates a few problems. So some of the feedback we received was that it could be reinforcing the savior complex too. And the savior complex is where you decenter indigenous people and present them as people who who are vulnerable and weak and needs you to help, right? And these communities are super strong. I mean, they can't. I think it's just unethical to represent them as somebody that, well, they can help us, basically. It's just that the situation right now, in the context of a threat of genocide, is a pretty big deal, right? So, yeah, there was the whole conversation about the savior complex, but in this context, the potential for support outweighed the potential for that kind of reinforcement in this context, in this specific context. But by saying that, we don't say that the savior complex is not important, is that it needs to be addressed in another way, at another layer of this campaign as well. So then one of the things we did that was actually very interesting in this sense, so there was an offer from an artist of a beautiful song that was created for the context of Colombia, but that also fit very well with the context of Brazil, of a song to the communities, back to the communities. And the song was sent to the communities, actually. And then the communities wanted to do something with the song in relationship to their struggle. And so the song and the struggle were put together, and then back to the communities, and they said, we want to be part of everything. So there was a collaboration that went back and forth, and the result is something that I'm going to show you. And I want you to pay attention to how you have a white passing body inviting people into a conversation and then making space for the communities to also be part of it. So in this one, we have a mix. In the first one, we had only the indigenous communities, the one that I didn't show you. Then we had the CRCs, and now the researchers, and now we have one that mixes the two. So I'm going to show it to you as well, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it.
Un cuerpo inmenso con huesos rotos y entre silencio noto un cuerpo inmenso con huesos rotos y entre el silencio noto que somos adictos al poder, al placer de no ver que mi abundancia es culpable de tanta escasez. Para sanar la herida hay que llorar el llanto de un mundo que se quema, de un mundo que no llena. Para sanar la herida que muy dentro ya arde, hay que mover el canto, hay que querernos tanto. Un mundo que se quema, un cuerpo que se inunda, hay que mover el canto, hay que querernos tanto, hay que mover el llanto, hay que querernos tanto, hay que no es de derecha ni a la izquierda, el fondo está en la raíz, en las manos que tejen y sanan, las que siembran el maíz y el plátano, la papa, la resistencia, la resiliencia, el café, el cuidado, la tierra, las aguas y las sangres, los vientos. Un cuerpo inmenso con huesos rotos y entre el silencio noto que somos adictos al poder, al placer, a no ver que mi abundancia es culpable de tanta escasez.
So what really worked for us in the campaign in creating this video was, number one, the collaboration itself was incredible, and the combination of the songs with the messages and the pictures also creates a very unique invitation for deeper intimacies, for disimmunization, and for turning people towards each other. So I think that's the most beautiful thing of the video. However, it only works, again, with certain communities, now certain demographics, and not others. But it was an incredible learning moment of something that was very beautiful to see. There are those moments as well. So remember that it's not just the difficult and the hard. We have to make space for the joyful and the things that become incredible as you were in the middle of it, or unimaginable, right? So we also have created a house movement, and this was with TikTok, and I would like to show that to you because here the call was for people to be able to do something in return. What we also learned was that the communities were really charged by seeing a response, right? So one of the things that we started to focus on was how to create a response. And the response was a house challenge where people respond to a call for us to say on social media, we're with you, we're watching house. So here is the TikTok video that does
The Amazon forest is in danger. Brazil is voting to legalize the destruction of the Amazon forest as well as the extermination of the indigenous people who protect it. The indigenous people are the last line of defense for the Amazon and they are asking for our help.
Eu sei que você se importa. Sei que não vai nos deixar sozinho nessa luta. House.
If you'd like to show support through Instagram or TikTok, please participate in our hashtag House Challenge. Upload a video of yourself saying, "We are with you, we are watching," with the hashtag House to show the indigenous communities that we see them fighting for our survival and that we are with them in that fight. If you'd like to find other ways to support, please visit our website, lastwarning.org. To the indigenous communities who are putting their lives on the line, fighting for our collective survival, we are with you, we are watching, House.
So we're still working on that too, on expanding that, seeing how a version of it can go viral. And that's one of the strategies of the campaign. Another strategy is actually an Amazon fast where you would go on the 20th of August, and that's Will that is coordinating actually, 20th of August without beef, soy, corn, and its derivatives, which means that you're not going to eat any industrialized food because this is everywhere, to show awareness, to develop awareness of the chains that create our complicity with the deforestation, right? And the extermination of indigenous people in the Amazon. So from here, what happened was that a week ago, there was violence escalation. The government started to call for an open fire. There was a leaked audio with a government official calling for open fire on isolated groups in the Amazon. And the Brazilian president started to encourage farmers to shoot at indigenous peoples. And then just yesterday, one of the bills passed the lower house in the Congress with 2/3 of the vote. And this bill legalizes and gives amnesty to land invasions in indigenous territories. Remember when we were talking about that new ultra-conservative, far-right landless movement? They are the ones who are ready now to invade. And they're armed and they're just waiting for a signal, right? They are standing by. So when that, as these things are evolving, we're having to adapt the campaign to a much more serious tone of witnessing and being with. It's witnessing, which is a concept by Erasmo Manacan, which we're going to have to witness the unfolding ecocide and genocide in Brazil. And we need people to be with us for the long haul. That's what's going to honor what these communities are trying to do. And that's why also we didn't know in the beginning that the name of the campaign would mean that, but it could be that last warning because they might not be here as this thing unfolds. So our responsibility then is to help as we can in this process of unfolding ecocide and genocide, which is difficult and painful. Again, negative capability. And we need now more people to have that capability to be able to witness this process. So we created another video. I'm not going to show it for you, but that is the video that then shows and talks about the threat, the real threat, and the fact that these people are armed and they are ready and they're unafraid and they are standing by, including at the border of some of the villages and the settlements of Chief Ninawas communities. So at this point, the communities asked us to fundraise for cameras that can be put on your chest with a chest strap to document the violence and create a system where this footage will go to a protected cloud and have people watching, and including for evidence that can be used in international criminal courts. So we have been fundraising for that, and that really allowed this to hit home that it may be unavoidable, and we may not be able to stop this train wreck from happening, but we cannot turn away, and and what's happening there is just showing something that is coming for all of us in terms of the storms of this period of time in society. So we're now at the stage where we are readapting the campaign, and even beyond that, to a campaign that invites people to the painful process of witnessing and witnessing, and that support people not to turn their backs on the unfolding ecocide and genocide. So with that, I'll leave you with the call that we made a call for artists, a house call for artists as well, asking people to help us it's in the role of art in helping to witness this. We asked artists who could offer something to support, activate the imagination in that direction. And this is one of the videos that we've received. It's from Julia Uhela, and she lives in Vancouver. And that's the video I leave you with as we wrap up the course. And I wish you the best in your journey, and that our paths cross again soon.
I'm Julia Uhela. I'm a singer, and I live in British Columbia in Canada, where we're facing a heat dome and uncontrollable wildfires due to climate change. I'm horrified by what's happening in Brazil. The government is trying to destroy the Amazon and exterminate the indigenous peoples who are the Amazon's last line of defense. If the Amazon is lost, climate crises will escalate exponentially. I feel the pain of the forest and of the guardians of the forest who are risking their lives for the future of our entire planet. I raise my voice alongside theirs. My song is a cry of warning, an omen of destruction, coming destruction, a plea, a scream to wake up before it's too late. It speaks of 7 pairs of eagles on a rock and a departure that one never returns from. Okay, hey, na teskale shirake, hey, sadampara volo, ma frajerka rozmila, aj naczekaj ma domu. Tiffany Nawa, I hear you. We're with you. We are watching. Hush, hush.